And thank you. And we'll record today's session, so please keep your mics and cameras off, but feel free to use the chat. There will be an opportunity to ask questions at the end, because we'll do 5 minutes with each panelist, and then we'll open to a panel discussion. So yeah, we can unmute your microphones and put your cameras off at the end if you want to ask your questions in person, or feel free to pop your questions in the chat, and we'll do our best to get to all of them. So with no further ado, I would love to introduce Sally Rossiter. Sally is a Senior Health Promotion Officer from Better Health Network, and she's a highly skilled health promotion officer who is able to bring professionals, practitioners, and community members together to build social connection, increase a sense of belonging, and foster safe, equal, and respectful relationships. She's particularly adept in the early years settings, and she's developed a model called Being Equal, which took the respectful relationships model for schools and adapted it for the early years. And Better Health Network tested it with 5 services. Thank you so much for being with us today, Sal. Is she? Yeah, there she is. Sally, can you tell us a bit about the Being Equal model and how it came about?
I'd be delighted to, Dan. And firstly, I must acknowledge you in your role in developing the Being Equal program. And you were very instrumental in formulating the model and adapting it from the RR program within schools to the early learning setting. So I guess I'd also like to acknowledge Lydia, who's one of the educators that we've worked with, actually at two of the centres that we've implemented the program, and all the services and educators who have participated in the program. I'd also like to just acknowledge my colleague Nalini, who's working on the program at the moment, and all the team at the BHN Health Promotion team. I guess at the heart of Being Equal is that we want all children to have equal opportunities to grow, develop their interest, ideas, and identity, and to learn and build healthy relationships. So the whole of service approach that we developed takes into that primary prevention process, and I guess at the heart of that is that that if we're going to sustain change over time when we're looking at gender equality and respectful relationships, we need to have the scaffoldings within each early learning service to support that to happen. And we've identified 6 areas to focus on, and that's looking at like the leadership sort of commitment, looking at also creating the culture, looking at culture and environment, educator skills and development. So this program really does support the respectful relationships training that DEET offer to early childhood educators, and it involves supporting educators and families in that role modelling of respectful relationships, but also at the heart of it is a continuous quality improvement program. So we've got the 6 key benchmarks or areas to focus on, and then there's a continuous quality improvement framework that we take the services through. So that is all about committing to the program and doing a lot of reflection and review of processes, policies, and practices, and then identifying areas that they'd like to strengthen. And to once they've identified those areas, they document those in their quality plan. I guess the other thing we've really considered when we were developing up the program of Being Equal is that it does align to the early learning frameworks that early learning services follow, and also their quality improvement, their national quality improvement standards as well. The other thing I guess that it's really good to mention too is that the Being Equal program does cover the early intervention of support, providing safe and supportive spaces for families impacted by family violence. So at the heart of that in the service is that services do look at their policies around that to make sure that they have that there are staff who are trained in identifying and responding to family violence, but they're also have referral pathways to support services as well. And then we also concentrate on that prevention, looking at challenging gender stereotypes and promoting gender respectful relationships. I think, Dan, is there anything else that you wanted me to sort of touch base on? So I think, you know, we go through that process with the early educators. I guess from what BH Better Health Network offer the services is that we do offer them the framework. We offer the resources to support them to do that. So there's a sort of a whole set of respect, gender equality and respect lenses that we use to support services and educators to do some reflection on certain aspects of their service. So whether that is looking at their culture or their environments, the way play activity areas are set up, are looking at their books, the way they actually bring books into the service, but also how they may use books in their intentional and informal learning. And the other thing that we also look at would be how to engage families as well. So it is all about, I guess, educators and families being able to offer a diverse range of opportunities for children to grow and develop that aren't restricted by gender stereotypes, but also that role modelling of respectful relationships. So in the continuous improvement process, services are then identifying the areas that they want to strengthen or adapt or change, and then they do that, and then they collect evidence to support the changes that they've made and to be able to track their process and then assess themselves against the 6 key areas. I think I guess, you know, what we did was that we did pilot it with 5 early learning services in Port Phillip and Stonington. And we used a co-design approach to do that. And so it was really valuable for us to really use their expertise of the educators and the services to really understand the early learning service setting. The settings that we piloted in included council managed and also some community managed services, and all the services sort of had their own unique sort of culture and environment that we were able to sort of adapt the program to meet their needs and sort of I guess start where they were in the journey about doing this work as well. And I guess noting that, you know, it's really important to note that all services and educators bring their own sort of experiences and prior knowledge around gender equality and respectful relationships to this space. And then since then, we've rolled it out to about 18 services. So some of them are still on the journey of implementing. Some of the services have, you know, started the process and then they may have stopped for various reasons. But the mix of services include long day care services and sessional kindergartens. So I think I'll leave it at that.
I was just interested to know how you chose the services to work with.
Well, the services were, we had prior, BHN has got a long history of working with early learning services. So they'd already worked with a few projects with us. So we sort of, from that knowledge, we identified services that were interested in the project. So it's voluntary. So they elect to be involved in the project. And there are a lot of services who are actually well on this sort of journey. So some of the services were very much into that, sort of promoting using an anti-bias approach to their work. And so basically all the services volunteer to be involved.
And what was the benefit for them to be involved if they were already quite far along on that journey?
I think it was often when they were involved in that journey, it may be just 1 or 2 educators who are actually leading the work within the service. So I think what being equal, doing that whole of service approach, is that it does give a big scaffolding for the looking at the service in its entirety to be able to sustain change over time, and to use that continuous improvement framework to keep update with the program. And I guess the other thing that it did too was that we did bring together a network of the services who were participating. So they met regularly to be able to share ideas and to problem solve together, to think about challenges, to explore options, to explore about adapting resources. And I guess we were very responsive in the training that they required to. So some of that could have been about, how to deal with resistance to the program, how to support families or bring families along too. But most of the services that we actually have participated in the program have had families who are supportive of this. The majority of the families are supportive of this, of promoting gender equality and respectful relationships.
And what sort of services, what would a ready service look like? What do they have to do to get themselves to the point where they can embark on this project?
Yeah, a good question, Dan. I think we did a lot of reflection on that. And I think what we found, and we did some work there with the services too, asking them where they were at in the journey. And I think that is being prepared to actually commit the time and resources to the program. And so that is being, allocating educated time to go off and do training, but also to be able to lead and implement the program within their service. We asked services to identify a couple of staff educators who would be there being equal champions. And then I think it was services being really reflective on their values and philosophy and their policies. So being prepared to do that reflection and review process across all areas, and being prepared to actually support the educators in the learnings that they bring back from the RR training that's offered by the Department of Education, to support them with additional resources about buying in more books, allocating time at team meetings to discuss this work, having it committed into their quality improvement programs. Some of the services were, their staff sort of made a commitment to, developing up their understanding in gender equality and respectful relationships. So I think some of that readiness was some of the key areas around readiness.
Yeah. And I think it's the same with any training. If you go and do some training, it's really hard to bring it back if the organization isn't on board. Yeah. So how important is it that the leadership are supportive of this project?
I think it's crucial to the success of the program, and all the leaders and the management were really supportive. So they really assisted in sort of promoting the program to their boards of management, to their families. They brought families along. They looked at ways to involve families in the whole process. So that could have been from anything from, being involved in the review of their policies to ensure that gender equality and respectful relationships were embedded in that, or it could be in, involving families in conversations around respectful relationships as well, and how to challenge gender stereotypes. So I think it is, having management is really key to the success of the program.
Absolutely. And I know you mentioned that you did some identifying and responding to family violence training. But how important was it to do that at the top of the program, the project cycle?
Yeah, I think, because our line of sight of the whole program is the prevention of family violence. So you can't, most early learning services, are a workplace, and they're predominantly female workforce, and they are a hub for families. So it's highly likely that, that there's going to be points where children and families and staff will be in fact impacted by family violence. So it's really important that I think that was one of the key foundations, and one of the first things we do is to ensure that they do have their processes and policies in place to be able to identify and respond to family violence, and to be able to, and now that with the MARAM reporting and requirements, to make sure that that's fully embedded in the program as well.
And I know you touched on this earlier as well, but we've just got a question in the chat saying they'd be interested to know how the Being Equal program sits alongside or with the rollout of the Department of Education and Training Respect for Relationships, in early learning centres.
Oh yeah, I think it complements it. It really does complement it. So educators, most of the services that we've worked with have had either one or two educators who have attended that training, and we continually promote the training dates of that training to the services, and it does just build on the knowledge that they gain from that training. So yeah, it does.
Thank you. And the Department of Education and Training, like it's fantastic, but it tends to be for the 4-year-old kinder teacher. Is that right? And a lot of daycare centres have a wide range of different education for their teachers and educators, like from Certificate 3 to masters and stuff. So this supports that learning of everybody. Yeah.
Supports learning, and we also, with Being Equal, offer each service an introduction to the whole program, and so through that program, through the introduction, we touch on the key concepts around family violence, the link between family violence and gender inequality, and some of those key concepts around looking at respectful relationships. And I think what the other thing too, we did develop a resource that have sort of 6 key messages around respectful relationships. And so those 6 key messages around that, children can be same and different, that children can be fair and friendly. So there's 6 of those messages, and they really do, I guess, reinforce what they've learned through that RR training.
Thank you so much, Sal. And we'll get you back for the panel discussion and hear a lot more about the Being Equal model. Next, it's my absolute pleasure to introduce you to Lydia McFetridge. She is an early childhood educator, a very experienced early years educator with a passion for advocating with children and a commitment to rethinking practices in the early years settings. Sharing a vision for a community that's safe, equal and respectful for all, Lydia has worked collaboratively across kindergarten and long day early years services for many years. As a champion of social change, Lydia brings a wealth of experience in implementing a whole of service approach to respect and equity. And she hopes that by sharing this experience with you all, that you'll be able to take up the baton of respect and equity in your services and create safer and more respectful relationships across the region. Thank you so much, Lydia, for being here with us today. I'd like to open by asking you, as someone who's seen the Being Equal implemented in different services, what do you think are the key components of success in implementing a program like this from an educator's perspective?
Definitely, as Sally mentioned, having management and different levels of the organisation on board. And I think that was a really key part with my journey. So I first started leading this in a 2-room kindergarten in 2019. And at the time, I only had my Certificate 3 qualification. But my management were really supporting the emerging leadership skills of the team and recognised my growth mindset and enthusiasm. So that kind of set us starting on this journey. And the support of both yourself and Sally, a shout out to you both for being some of the relationships entangled in this journey. As the director and I both joined the network meetings and started to champion this. And I think that was a really key part to being successful, in that it positioned a champion that was working in the classroom with the team and the children and the families on one level of the organisation, and then a champion that was in the management role and in the office and with different other levels of the organisation. So this really helped us to create consistency and a strong shared understanding and vision of how we were going to approach this. And it also meant that our brainstorming sessions had lots of consideration for different levels of the organisation when we were sort of thinking how to proceed and how to change the culture, or what we might want to modify or tweak. And so we took a place-based approach, really thinking about the strengths and challenges of our community and our team. And the first team that I was with, the two-room kinder, we had quite a competitive team at the time. So we developed some playful games and different ways to sort of look at unlearning and shifting the culture. And our families at the time in that service were also quite active in that they read all our documentation quite carefully, ask questions, were quite keen to engage with resources that we would use, posters, things like that, and use it in their homes as well. So that was a really strength of that community that we built upon. So we made sure that we were quite vulnerable in our written documentation of the journey that we were going on, which led into lots of rich conversations with families as well, when we were sharing the tools that we were using for reflecting and the way that we were working to change our language and why this kind of thing in our documentation. So fast forward to now, and I'm in a much larger team with different dynamics in a long daycare service. And it's also, again, through a place-based lens, it feels like it's kind of a different, with that there's post-lockdown wariness of government. I work in a council setting, and this can have lots of layers of management and be a little risk adverse. So there's lots of those things to consider when you look through that place-based lens. It really helps you be intentional in your approaches and set up success. So for myself and my team, it's been communicating with many layers of council, organising meetings and kind of selling it to whoever will listen by connecting it to the policy, the legislation, and our responsibility and our commitments to the community. So that's been like a really big part, is advocating by selling it and connecting it to all your relevant legislation, documentation, and commitments. And a lot of this work in shifting culture has also been about creating time and space for reflection with the team. So as Sally mentioned, that involves a commitment from the organisation as well. But I think that we've got a little bit ingenious at making the use of small amounts of time as well, especially in long daycare settings. There's not a lot of time to reflect together, and any time that does happen is after hours, and we've got a very long and challenging day. So looking at even 10 minutes of time and using intentional strategies to make sure that you are using that to reflect rather than just doing housekeeping, and connecting back to how is our work showing the practice principles that we're governed by or guided by. How is respectful relationships and equity and diversity playing out in our rooms, and being really intentional about this. So something that I kind of hadn't anticipated at the start was how much of my listening skills I would need to develop. Obviously that goes with leadership, is being able to listen, but really creating space to listen to the stories of the families and the team. And not everyone comes into this work having experienced respectful relationships or equity in their own life. And there's, the diversity across any team that you work in, there's a lot of different stories and values there. So really being intentional in slowing down and being willing to listen and connect on a personal level, but then shift into connect on a professional level and go, okay, this is how I feel, this is my experiences, and then how we're going to move forward together through the lens of all our guidelines and what it will look like so that we can improve our practice. So between the two settings, the pace really varied, but I think the key indicators of success were very much the same. And this was that we started to normalise this as a topic of discussion. So at first, this can be quite uncertain. I mean, it's still uncertain, but it can be kind of almost like there can be stigma around it, and educators can be unsure, are we allowed to talk about this? How should I respond? And I think the more that you talk about it, the more you normalise it and reflect through that lens, the more comfortable it gets in, rather than always having to prepare for it nervously, that you have built up your capacity to respond in the moment. And I think really seeing all of us go on that journey together is the most powerful part that I've taken away, is that it's built up our capacity to respond really intentionally and to problem solve with children. So as we built up shared resources with families, children, and amongst our team, it's created this sustained shared thinking and language that have really empowered everyone that's been involved.
That's so good. And I think we talked about this offline, is that initially you sort of need those tools and the, questions and reflective questions and, some little prompts and things like that. But eventually, once you've got the habit of it, it becomes embedded in practice, doesn't it? And you can see the educators just taking opportunities in the rooms to have those discussions with the children and parents and each other as well. And we talked a lot about those in the communities of practice, like how do you pull someone up really with empathy and compassion if they've done something like, said something like, oh, can I get some strong boys to come and help me with this table? What do you challenge them in that moment, or a little bit later, or so having those conversations are really fantastic. The other thing that you mentioned was the ways that you try to grab a little bit of time here, there, and everywhere. How did you continue that conversation with the educators in, like, particularly in the larger settings where you didn't have so much, dedicated time?
Yeah, that's something that we kind of brainstorm and tweak all the time. But some of the things that we've used is putting monthly journal prompts. So I collaborate with the educational leader, and we we'll write through that lens as well, and with whatever we're building on. So all applying different lenses as well, like a gender lens, to our reflections in our journal prompts. And also we've done regular check-ins. So I like to talk about the unspoken rules. So do a check-in to sort of check where educators are at what they've absorbed, because I think with a lot of this work, you absorb unspoken rules that people start to feel like, oh, I can't do this or I can't do that, and it becomes disempowering. So we started to do reflections on that, and then again go back and look at actually what are our values, what do we want. So rather than a rule, it was setting goals and values. And another one that we've been using is really great for like 10 minutes. If you've only got 10 minutes, is have a reflection question or a scenario, break into small pairs, have a reflection in pairs, and then bring it back to share as a group. So you can really maximize your time. And it also is kind of great because not everyone feels comfortable talking in front of the whole team. So it provides that connection, building your team in the little groups, and then you can bring it back and still have that shared thinking and understanding that you're working towards. Yeah, I think they're
and I was just thinking, being vulnerable and being honest with your colleagues is quite a challenging thing to do. How do you create that safety within the team?
I think you have to model it yourself, definitely, and take risks. Even public speaking is not my favorite thing. Even speaking here today, but I think taking risk, but it's also quite freeing. Because when you're open and vulnerable and you don't set yourself as an expert, but you present yourself in all your flaws and your challenges, it's quite freeing to move forward together. And even some of the playful approaches we used in our reflection in the first service, we had like a swear jar, we called it, where we would put tokens in when we would catch ourselves, and we might be using gendered language or greeting someone by their appearance and things like this, habits we were trying to change. And rather than looking at the tokens in the jar as a fail, we were looking at it as, wow, look at all this awareness that we're building up. So kind of flipping things as well and going, oh, that's a win. I'm catching myself. That means I'm actively changing my habits. And these are, I think, celebrating the small moments.
I love that. That it's not punitive either. You're not sort of slapping people on the wrist and saying you've done wrong. It's just saying we're going to try to do something a bit different. And that's amazing. Thank you so much. I might we'll have a chance to continue the conversation in the panel, but I might take the opportunity to introduce Lauren French. Thank you so much, Lydia. That was fascinating from an educator's perspective. I really, really appreciate you being here today. Our next panelist is Lauren French. She's a proud Wiradjuri woman who had the joy of growing up on Larrica lands. Larrakia land, in the Northern Territory, Lauren has always been passionate about finding ways to support and empower First Nations children and families, and strongly believes that every young person deserves a life filled with respectful relationships and equitable experiences. In her current role as Head of Education and Community Development with Body Safety Australia, Lauren specialises in prevention of child sexual abuse, consent and respectful relationships, puberty and sexuality, and LGBTQIA+ equity and inclusion education. Lauren, thank you so much for being here. Can you briefly tell us about the work that Body Safety Australia does in the early years?
Of course. Thanks so much for having me. So Body Safety Australia is a non-for-profit charity that was founded in 2015 by Dion Carson and Whitney Yip, and came predominantly from a need that we saw in community for prevention education that was particularly targeting at the time child sexual abuse prevention. And it was coming from one of our co-founders, Dion Carson, who's our current CEO. She was doing a large amount of puberty sexuality education in primary school. Very fun, I can tell you right now. But she was getting a really high amount of disclosures of abuse from young people. And so because of that, looked at transitioning out of just doing purely education, but without the primary prevention lens, and really moving into how do we do best practice in this work. And so I did some time to do some international research and work out what was the world standard in abuse prevention, and how could we put that into a context in Australia, and working with schools of early childhood spaces particularly. And so we actually piloted and first started in early childhood spaces. We now work across primary and secondary school spaces, but we always have a whole of community approach and a strength-based approach in our work. So what that means basically is just it takes a village to raise children, it takes a village to protect children. And so we never just work with children, we always want to work with the village. So that involves doing professional developments with educators, and it involves doing workshops and engagements with parents and community members. As we're very aware that, as Lydia and Sally, we've talked about for that kind of like involving community into the work, because obviously we might spend a huge amount of time with the children in our care, but obviously they go home, and we want to make sure that as much as we can, messages are really consistent across their world. And also that kind of, how do we promote empathy and consideration for parents and communities, where so often in the early years space, they may have had, no experience in an educational setting, except for their own. And I'm sure we all understand we've come quite a while away from when most of us and from parents were in school or in early childhood spaces. So really having that kindness and care of holding their hand a little bit through that journey. And we've spent a lot of time holding the hands of a lot of early childhood centres in the journey of cultural change when we talk about gender equity and inclusion, and particularly around the strength of diversity. So we work across Victoria. So we work in metro, rural and regional spaces, and our particular program, two in early childhood. So one is our Superstars program, and that's primary our child sexual abuse prevention work, which is our kind of core program. But the other program we do in early childhood is our Gender Glorious program, and that's specifically about inclusivity and equity work, gender stereotype work, but really helping communities that are working with trans and gender non-conforming young people and community members, and how we look at that from, again, that strength-based approach with the community. And so those programs are part of school readiness funding in Victoria, which means early childhood centres can use that funding to get us in. And that's also why we do a huge amount of rural and regional work, because we're able to use that to be able to go and travel and go to communities that often, unfortunately, miss out on a huge amount of this really critical reflective work and practice. So that's kind of the programs that we do in that one. We've actually, our Gender Glorious program has predominantly been in the past a professional development, and it's sort of like either a sort of introduction to our full day course for educators that they can do over a period of weeks with us, that really deep dives into anti-bias approach, as well as, what does it look like to engage parents and communities safely, for educators to be safe, for communities to be safe? How does this align with educators' professional obligations, particularly a lot of linkage to child safe standards, particularly the new child safe standards and standard 5 when we talk about this work. And then also how to look at it from strength base. So how to look at the strength of diversity in communities and really move away from a gender neutral lens, which I think has been really common in early years spaces. It's actually why we intentionally called the program Gender Glorious, because we want to, invite educators and talk about how do we actually invite gender in rather than excluding out. And how do we make gender glorious spaces where we're celebrating and we're aware of stereotypes, and so we're widening our idea of what gender looks like, is, what is for boys, what is for girls, what is for all children, rather than what can sometimes happen is we're just not going to talk about gender at all, and assume that creates a neutral effect, where obviously it doesn't. Children at this age are naturally, developmentally normal to be categorizing their world, and they're going to do that at home. They're going to do that from the media they're watching. They're going to do that from just walking around in the world. And so if the early years space is actually neutral, all it does is create a space where they will reinforce the stereotypes they're already developing. If educators don't feel confident that they can, widen that view. So our training, we do a lot of modeling of what that practice looks like, having sort of space for deep reflection. As I think, Lydia, you were mentioning, it's very rare that early childhood educators get time to sit and actually talk through this and look at what it can do in a service. So we provide a lot of that space and help kind of facilitate what that looks like, gives examples, gives ways that it's worked in other spaces, as well as, having a safe place to challenge, particularly if we work with centres where we have some educators who are quite concerned about the work, and that can come from really different spaces, whether it's concerned about how to do it appropriately and safely with children versus how to do it appropriately and safely with parents, versus that kind of balance between personal opinion and belief and view versus professional obligation. And that's also why we step in a lot to do work with centres around their parent community engagement, because we're very aware that in a lot of communities, this is a tricky topic to discuss, and it's really hard for educators to do it if we're already trying to engage families and talking about, what's happened in the day and did you read the newsletter that went out. Trying to then engage in this conversation can be really challenging. And so often we provide a bridge for centres so that we can come in and have those harder conversations with families to start, so that then we can redirect and educators can take on that conversation, and it means we kind of buffer the often perceived backlash and concern, because it's many times we believe it will be much harder to do this work than it ever actually is with families and communities.
And do you think that fear stops people from doing anything at all?
Yeah, of course. I think this is also a space where, particularly in the early years, there can be belief of not knowing quite where the place is for an early childhood educator to do this work, because sometimes this falls into, that's home stuff, that's family dynamic stuff, that's values things, which to an element, there is always that role. But this fully, falls into our early years frameworks in Victoria. It falls into our child safe standards. It falls into all of the things we're already doing. And I think there's a definite fear of parent and community backlash. And I want to be really clear, it's not completely unwarranted. In the past 12 months, there has been a real increase in pushback to this kind of work because of a lot of the really loud minority of families who have potentially been radicalized online or have a lot of misinformation about what this work does, and will kind of throw out words like grooming and these sort of things when actually we're talking about, equity and inclusion and safety. Like, we're actually talking about safety with children, and a lot of the time it's the missing link of how this actually plays out in child sexual abuse prevention, because they're really deeply linked.
And what have you found works best with parents?
I think what, in all of the spaces we work with, it's, seeing them as human, which sounds really funny, and not that they're all a monolith, like that they are really different and there's really variety and community, and that acknowledgement that normally the parents that will engage with this first fall into like two categories, which is your super supportive parents that are really excited, really engaged. They're like thrilled that you're doing this work. And the second is the parents that are concerned. And I think as people, we tend to jump to a conclusion about why those parents are concerned. And, my biggest tip to anyone is stay curious about that. If someone says they're not okay with something, always ask why, always thank them for sharing and dive deep into it, because we will assume something and it's not necessarily actually what the concern is.
I love that.
Because then, it's one of those things, we can't address a concern if I've made an assumption about why you are against it, unless, without asking you. So I think, having that human element and always setting up expectation. I think the biggest issue that comes up with parents and communities is where early childhood centres and educators, where we try to do something new and, you know, we're testing it out, but we haven't necessarily set up an expectation with families about what that's going to mean or look like. So if it's about language, if it's about something that's going up in the room, if it's about activities or things we're doing, actually giving families an expectation setting. So, hey, we're going to do this. This is something we're doing. This is the why. So just as much as we want their why, we need to give our why, not, you know, because it's not the, oh, we just saw this, thought it would be cool, we'll give it a go. It's really deeply linked to our practice, our frameworks. It's really deeply linked to what we're trying to achieve in the room and in the centre, and this is why we're doing it. And you give them at least, you know, a good week before you're actually going to do the thing to kind of understand where that's sitting. Because I think most of the time you get parents who get, and community members who can get a little bit, you know, put aside sort of thing, feeling, if they feel like it's been sprung on them. So I think the easiest way is setting up expectations and creating safe spaces to talk through concerns. We've worked with a lot of centres where, you know, we might come in and do like an information night or a workshop because we're doing, you know, work with the children, or the educators are wanting to do more of this gender equity work and respect relationships work. But sometimes, you know, an information session, a workshop is not suitable. And we've gone in, you know, I've gone in with communities and done just yarning circles to actually just talk through it really, you know, casually, but in a way that's much more inviting in. We've done work with, you know, different cultural groups, and I've worked with interpreters to come in and do like a safe space to talk through those questions. And, you know, it's also really about asking, it sounds really silly, but asking communities what they need. Hey, we want to do this work. We want to talk to you about it. What's the best way for us to do that? Like a survey can work maybe sometimes, particularly with parents where they're quite time poor. You know, it might be chats, and it might be, hey, we're having an external person come in to actually facilitate that conversation.
Yeah, fantastic. And I think we'll touch on that, because I think I saw a couple of questions about specific, how do you like do this when there's other cultural or religious things, you know, elements in the centre. But thank you so much. That was really amazing. And I would love to bring back Sally and Lydia and just open the panel discussion. I think we had some questions from the registration already, so I might start with one of those, and it's a really good one. How do we implement culture without being tokenistic? Lauren, do you want to start?
Yeah, sure. I think you have to take time is the first thing. Like whenever you know, try to make a culture shift or change, you know, it's that acknowledgement that realistically culture shifts in early years take 3 to 5 years in a lot of times. And so that commitment to the time it's going to take to do that work. And then my other thing, when you're worried about if it's tokenistic, is it a bit lip servicey, asking yourself who's the audience for what you're doing. Because is the audience for what you're doing children that you're working with and their safety? Is it about diverse communities that you're working with? Is it, you know, like who is that audience for? And if you're trying to be inclusive to maybe a diverse community and your audience isn't actually them, then you maybe are being tokenistic because the you know, the lens isn't quite there. Versus if we ask ourselves, oh, okay, like who am I really trying to, whose needs am I really trying to meet? Then that can help you be a little bit, you know, less of that tick box. And I guess I think it's also, if you ever think you're ticking a box, it's probably a little tokenistic because it's a lot more time and things to be put in. Nothing, unfortunately, I wish it was, but nothing's ever as easy as I put a sign up, I put something in my email signature, or I, you know, got one book and that was it, and then I'm done.
Yes. Sal, I think I'll throw to you, you know, in terms of the timing, like, you know, how long does something like this take?
Around implementing
A culture that's not tokenistic, you know.
Yeah, I think it is. It does take time. I guess it depends really on the culture that's already there within an early learning service. So a lot of early learning services are, you know, quite progressive. They're early adopters, and you know, that's, you know, makes up quite a few of the early learning services that we've already been working with. And I think it is just slowly building on where they're at, as Lauren sort of mentioned. And it is involving educators in the process. It is involving families as well. So it could be involving families in sort of creating the values and philosophy of the service as well. It's sort of looking at that. But also in some of the activities that could be fun, like, you know, careers dress up days involving the families. It's just doing that sort of like, you know, testing ideas with families. I think, you know, the 6 key messages that we've developed, I think, with the Being Equal program about being fair and friendly, you know, children can work together, you know, just starting there with some of those key messages is just a really sort of a good entry point, and then just building and slowly building. So I think time-wise, yeah, it does take most of the centres that we've worked with, you know, we've worked with them probably for about 18 months often. Yeah, I would say.
Till they get to that point of sort of like embedding practice. I feel like it's 12 to 18 months, definitely. Yeah. Lydia, from your perspective, how do you avoid being tokenistic?
I think take everyone along. This is work about relationships, and it's in relationships that you change culture. So doing things for somebody, but doing it with them. So making sure you're going at a slow pace, you're taking everyone along. And I think in that way, you've got lots of different lenses and opinions and intersectionality. You've got so many considerations. And yes, I know that if you're an enthusiastic educator, you can want to just be like, all right, let's perfect this and we'll do it straight away. But slowing down and taking everybody along and kind of working out how to flourish together. There's a quote that I love that's about learning how to flourish together without looking for a final piece. And it's just keeping moving along without having a picture of what it exactly looks like, but being kind of open to all the possibilities that will unfold.
Yeah, I love that. And I think, you know, on the whole, early learning services are doing a lot of what we're talking about already, but it's often just giving everybody a common language and documenting it and just almost proving the practice that's already happening. So, you know, taking that strengths-based approach is really good as well. One of the other questions is sort of linked in terms of culture, but how would you manage the challenge of an early learning service with cultural needs such as religious considerations against the balance of gender equity? I might go Lauren again first.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, we've worked with, like for our Identical Voice program, we've worked with over 40 services in Victoria, and obviously hugely, you know, huge diversity and culture in religion, in, you know, all the different things in the communities. Again, my first kind of preface is initially we worked in a lot of services where, because there's diversity in cultural community or religion, that there's an assumption that this will be hard. And I will just first put in that it can be an assumption completely. And when you actually start doing it, there is no issue. And I think it again is setting up that sort of going to families, community. This is what we're doing. This is the why, and allowing a space for families to go, well, this is our consideration. And then again, asking, you know, how do we do that then that is safely for your child's needs, as well as making sure we're meeting needs of all the children we're working with, that we wouldn't, you know, we wouldn't not do a piece of work for all children in that way. That's, you know, meeting our frameworks and our, you know, all of our policies and, you know, the things we're trying to do. But it's about helping that family understand that why and why it's important, why it is helpful for all young people to learn about, and that actually, you know, while yes, maybe this doesn't align with your family's religious beliefs, this is about making sure that all the children in the room feel seen and heard, just as much as it's okay for your child to be, you know, feeling this way, having these values. It's also okay for another child to have a differing value and opinion. Actually doing this work creates empathy for each other, respect for each other, respect of that diversity of opinion, and actually, you know, then can strengthen that. But I think as well, it's empowering educators to also feel okay when it's time to bring in external or refer, like not even talking about myself, talking about someone who is part of that family's community. because, you know, I'm an Aboriginal woman. When I go into community, I can be the best placed person to speak with Aboriginal communities about this work. However, when I'm working with with Muslim communities, I may not be the best person to do that work, but there are others who are, and it's completely okay to then, as an educator, go, great, can I connect you with this person who actually is really across all of this, and will be able to connect with them in a way you cannot. And that's actually also completely okay.
And I think that's a lovely sort of, you know, building those relationships as a service is super important, to have those people on hand that you know and trust, and that you can connect your community with is really like invaluable, isn't it?
Well, exactly. And it's completely, you know, it's a bit ridiculous to assume that across every centre there's going to be an educator that's paired with every member of family, community, and all those sort of things. And also it can put a big burden on an educator, particularly if we're talking about cold community, when there's an educator who, let's say, speaks language that the family speaks, to then make that educator be the spokesperson for all, is potentially not safe or appropriate for that educator. So it's also that willingness of, actually, who are the external, you know, supports, networks, community that we can bring in, which then actually strengthens the community of the centre.
I love that. I love that. Does anybody else have anything to add around that?
No.
There's another related sort of question saying, asking what are sort of some intersectional practices that are age appropriate when we're working with children? Lydia, would you take that?
Sure, I'll go for it. So I think, like, when you approach this work, being holistic, looking at your materials, your resources, your reflections, your program planning, and putting that lens onto it. And I know we're so privileged now, a lot of resources that we use come in lots of languages, posters do, that kind of thing. So really thinking about, again, that place-based lens, knowing your community, the best ways to communicate with them, and finding the resources. As Lauren just mentioned as well, like reaching out. And I think that that's something in early years as an educator, there's a lot of pressure on your head, and there is kind of a pressure to be an expert and perfect and take on a lot in ways that other jobs wouldn't so much have to do. And I think I find it empowering to kind of resist that and go, actually, our strength is in our relationships and our community and our networks. So finding the right people, reaching out and getting other people on board to support it.
I love that. We've got a question here for Sal. Would love to understand if Better Health Network is looking to scale and Being Equal program and make it available more broadly. What areas do you cover?
Yeah, so Dan, so it was originally piloted, as I said, in Port Phillip and Stonington, and now that we're part of the BHN network, so we'll be offering it probably next year, or, you know, midway through this year, to the LGAs that we cover. So that would be Kingston, Bayside, Glen Ira, and Port Phillip and Stonington. But I think if people are here from other areas, they might like to look at some of the other programs that are available too. So if you're out in the east, Access Health have got a fabulous program called Free to Be Me, so you could get in touch with them. Also, Level Playground have some fabulous resources online, so it's really, you know, good to have a look at their website as well. And
I've listed some at the end. I've got a slide that we can show everybody with the resources that we discovered, and they've got lots and tools and advice and book lists and things like that.
And even looking at Safe and Equal have probably got the resources. I think that the check that Melbourne Council, they piloted a similar program with one early learning service and developed up some resources as well. So there are a lot of resources out there, and we're very happy to link people into resources. Yeah.
Another question here is the training of educators in long day care or kinders based on the Marin framework? Is there funding to support this training, or should we have centres who do not have educators with these skills to offer them training?
Yeah, I think most services can go on to the Department of Education program and then register to do the online training for MARAM. But from our experience, it's usually one or two key people in the service who do that program and have the, the knowledge of coordinating and the reporting requirements that are associated with the MARAM training. I don't know how does that happen in your service, Lydia?
With the MARAM training?
Yes, yeah.
So we all complete like a online portfolio, and some of us have done like a bigger session, like a professional development session with it. Yeah.
Yeah, I was just reading the chat. There's some project coordinator for Level Playgrounds. So thanks for mentioning their work. And they've put their email in the chat if anybody wants to reach out to them. Yeah, and Christine says the MARAM training question was more in relation to key people for skills in intervention. Christine, did you want to jump on and just unmute yourself and tell us what you mean?
Yeah, I was just picking up on Sally's earlier when she was talking about the fact that, as part of your Better Being Equal program, that, yeah, in terms of a couple of educators or an educator or staff being skilled so that they can, in the case of a family violence situation, intervene early or pick it up and refer. So I guess I was talking about, is there training available if we're talking to our early learning centres, and can we offer them the opportunity to do that, MARAM framework training? Is there funding to separately to do that?
It depends also where you're located, I think. I know I've just partnered with Wellsprings for Women in the South, who do identifying and responding to family violence training for early learning services, but from a cultural lens. Yeah. Was there anything? I think, yeah, Sally mentioned that there is funding for MARAM training for early learning services. We found that, MARAM's very focused on information sharing, but the models that we were trying to work on was, how do you have those conversations with families? How do you bridge that gap between, making a referral and doing all of the, safety checks and filling out forms and paperwork and all of that, to the actual sticky thing of raising things with families and that real empathetic conversation that can be quite challenging for educators when they've not had much experience around that. So I suppose you sort of need to, if you want educators to be able to have those brave discussions, you need to give them space to, practice it and role model it and know how to start having those conversations.
Mm.
Did that sort of answer your question, Christine?
Yeah, exactly that. I think, if you identify something, a situation, you do need to be skilled to do that. So if staff want to be trained, I guess, you're saying there is some funding available. Where would you source that? Or I guess we'd reach out to you, WHISE, and say, look, we've got some, early learning centres that want their staff trained, and see where you go from there. Yeah, because I wasn't aware they could do it. So that's good. But yeah, it's highly specialised, and you don't want to go in unless you know what you're doing.
No.
Start asking those sort of questions. So yeah.
And it is good for the educators to have an understanding of what their leave entitlements are for if they're experiencing family violence, and for them to feel safe and protected in their workplace as well first, and then give them the confidence to have those conversations with children and families, so that you're protecting them every step of the way. Thank you. So there's another question about resources, but I might leave that till the end. A question that I get asked a lot, and something that's come up in a lot of the work is how can you do a prevention of gender-based violence initiative appropriately in the early years? I'd like to just pose it to all of you. You know, why do you think early years is a necessary setting for this work? And I might start with Lydia.
Okay. So, well, I guess the first thing would be that research shows us that children are developing their attitudes and their bias and things by around age 5. So obviously we want to get in early to have really positive role models and examples and things. In response to that, it gives us a really clear indicator of why this is important at this age. And I think that a lot of that question could more be, if you can't picture what it looks like, it feels like maybe we're talking about big, heavy topics with children, whereas what we're doing is we're developing healthy responses and the skills to negotiate with others in respectful ways, and awareness of, and back to that intersectionality question, awareness of fairness, similarities and difference, all these things that we're building up with children are what it looks like. And then hopefully these are the skills that people take up and a mindset that might be different.
100%. Yeah, Lauren, did you have anything to add to that?
No, I definitely just echo that thing of, you know, our 3 and 4-year-olds are already telling you really intense gender stereotypes and things that research shows us, you know, can lead to that attitude that creates gendered violence. And so, you know, it's not that we're going to a 3-year-old and going, okay, here are the drivers of gendered violence and here's what it looks like. You know, those aren't the words we're using. But it is, you know, as simple as modeling a conversation, like when it's oh, you know, this color isn't for girls, or boys are best, you know, girls don't play sports, you know, as something that I still get all the time. And it's that, you know, as an educator, being able to open that worldview and go, oh, why do we think girls can't do sports? And not necessarily even creating a debate with a 3-year-old. You're asking them, where did they get that information from? Oh, because they've never seen, because their family watches all this AFL on TV and there's never any girls playing, so therefore it must be impossible. And then as an educator going, yeah, that's really interesting. If we haven't seen that, I guess it is really hard to think that girls do that, but they do. And now how can I bring in resources and things, and let's watch an AFLW clip, and what are the pieces that can actually show, hey, yeah, now I'm opening a worldview that if I hadn't, would have become really concrete in their mind. And so it is that thing of, when we talk prevention, the whole point of prevention is to get early enough so that we're not unlearning all of the things. We're actually trying to cement really positive attitudes and beliefs. And so that's why it has to start in early years. At primary, I can tell you right now, somebody works in primary spaces, you end up just doing unlearning work because they already have a lot of attitudes and values at that point.
Yeah, I mean, one of the scary sort of stats that I remember reading was that girls as young as 6 already believe that boys are better at maths and better leaders, and, you know, things like that. And that's you know, that's prep.
Well, yeah. And if it might terrify some people, but when I work with year 3 and 4 in primary, a lot of boys are telling me how much they love Andrew Tate in those years. So to give you a really just clear cut of how quickly that kind of, you know, external influence is happening on our young people. And obviously if you don't then have those young people with a really strong foundation that has happened in the early years, then they're getting to that point of all of a sudden there's all these external attitudes that they can then start listening to and adopting really easily.
Sal, anything else you would add?
No, I think like what a lot of the early learning services have done is some of that sort of, you know, with the probably with the 4-year-olds is that sort of inquiry approach. So, you know, Lauren saying something, you know, like, you know, girls can't wear blue or something. And then that starts off a whole discussion about colours, and that colours are for everyone. They take, they do a little journey around exploring those things. Another centre has looked into like sport is for everyone too, and having that focus about, you know, developing up, exploring games and sports around who plays and who doesn't, and the skills that are required in those. So I think it's just constantly sort of feeding it into sort of conversations that you have with children, and then sort of that inquiry process as well.
And I think also potentially It's an opportunity to catch parents when they're at that, at the very beginning of their parenting journey, and have the opportunity to start, to change things up and question the way they're doing things, and model more respectful or equal relationships even. And if, because they're not solidified and they haven't, really solidified those roles, I suppose, because they're right at the beginning. So yeah, I think a lot of people don't necessarily critically think and, sit down and say, okay, who's going to do the bins, who's going to do the washing, who's going to, are we going to go part-time, are we going to, having those conversations potentially at that point would be would set them up for a much more equal relationship all the way through. One of the trickiest things we found doing it, Sally and I, was getting parent engagement. Lauren and Lydia, what are some of the most effective methods you've seen to get parents involved in this sort of work? I might start with Lydia.
I guess it depends on your community and how they like to engage. So it really does depend. But as I mentioned earlier, I found with one of the in one of the places I worked, that having a lot of documentation and resources available, then families would it kind of started conversations, and then we could kind of build on it and kind of check in with each other. But I found in the current community that I'm working with, making our resources available to families has really helped support conversations and get some of the tools that we're using into the home as well. So having a parent library where we've got lots of really well thought out books that aren't just for us to use, but they're for the whole community to use. So we've got these, and even songs. We've got a song about body boundaries that parents have never heard, but they now know all the words. It models key language and things like that. It's a bit of an earworm, but it has definitely sort of been one of the ways that it's creating conversations and shared thinking. So I think looking at like being a little bit kind and considerate with making things available to families, even if you don't have that many resources or much budget, I think sharing them is a really great way.
Thank you. And Lauren?
Yeah, I would definitely echo on that one of, that kind of, making them really a part of conversation in community. But I would also say a great way to start, particularly if you have maybe a more disengaged community or families, or like on this topic, they're a little bit more disengaged, is to create an ask where you're asking them to contribute. And so whether that is in a bit of co-design for a code of conduct at the early years place, or you're looking at doing a policy statement, or an inclusion statement, whatever it might be, but actually asking, hey, we would like a number of families to come in and actually co-design this with us. We want this to be representative of our community, and so we actually need your voices to do that. And so therefore you give families something tangible that they get to add their voice to, and so then they feel like they're really part of it, included. And then once they have a bit of that buy-in, they're much more likely to continue to be engaged as you then have other conversations when they've, because it's also that acknowledgement of their, their worth in the early years, that actually we're not just, the experts telling you as the parents how to be parents, because parents never love that. It is the, hey, actually, we're doing this together, and we actually need to work together, and we need your help. We can't actually do this without you, because then they feel valued.
I love that. And Sal, anything else you can think of?
Yeah, I think that's a really good place to start. I think sharing information through the communication channels that the Early Learning Centre has. So a lot of them have like Story Park or Facebook or whatever, and we've seen really good little stories about, if they're reading a book or messaging that they're teaching, and then sort of posting that, and then so that families can sort of practice that as well, has worked. Again, sort of involving them in the activities as well. So like Careers Day, or, sharing images about what their family makeup is, or just looking at that sort of, so that the centre reflects the families around the diversity of families, the different ways families are, the different roles that families have that may be, that are promoting gender equality and promoting, so having sort of visuals of those in the centre as well, I think is sort of some of the key things, because you can't be what you can't see, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think once somebody's done a book audit as well, like unsee that. And if you get parents to be involved in like the, gathering the data and pulling that together, then potentially, that they're on, because they can see the disparity. Yeah.
Yeah, just to jump in really quickly, I just wanted to add on to Sal what you were just saying, because I 100% agree. But I would challenge educators to think about, when you're reflecting community, that awareness that sometimes you won't know fully all of the intersections of your community, particularly if you do this at the beginning of a year before you've built a lot of rapport with families. And I do this a lot of work with, when we talk about First Nations families, as well as families where there is disability or accessibility things happening at home, where they might actually not disclose that to you, particularly at the beginning of the year, because of a range of systemic and other things, but that we still want to be thinking about how do we still show that representation, even if maybe you're thinking we don't have those families in the community. I'm always that kind of under the assumption that you do, you just might not know about it as of yet.
Is there are there any other questions from participants or our audience? Anybody else want to unmute themselves or pop something in the chat? Otherwise, if there are educators and teachers here today who would love to do this work but don't know where to start, where would you direct them, and what would your advice be? Whoever wants to go first.
Oh, I can make a start. I think looking at maybe doing the respectful relationships training that DEET offer. So I think they have got some workshops coming up in May and June. I think that's a really good place to start. So it's about being curious and building up your own understanding. Safe and Equal is a great website just to get that really basics about this work and how it relates to family violence prevention, and they've got some really good resources. Again, I think you can't go wrong by, like looking at Level Playground and all the resources that they have there. They would sort of be my sort of first, probably, my first sort of tips around sort of exploring this work. And then I think just looking at your own service and thinking about, oh, okay, how does this work relate to our own values and philosophy statements already? And you might be surprised that there are really strong links, but maybe that's not actually, it's written down and it's there, but it's not actually it's not alive and sort of in the culture and in practice. So maybe it's just that thing, and maybe looking for allies who others who are interested in doing the work as well.
My response was similar to Sally's, in that I was thinking, give yourself permission. So go into your research, go into your policies, the framework, your legislations, all the things that you're working under, and look for the permission in those. And that's also going back to what Lauren said about when you're sharing, you give your why. That's your why to then spread it on. So you're giving yourself permission and you're giving your why, and you can build from that. And I just wanted to say one more thing. If you're not so much an educator, but you're a manager or a leader that wants to roll this out, set up a team. So distribute your leadership so you can brainstorm would be my first step.
I think it's really important that it's not just one person in an organization. It's so hard, pushing a rock up a hill, aren't you? Trying to change it all by yourself. So having those allies within and without the organization. Yeah. Lauren, what have you found that works best?
I mean, look, self-promotion plug us. I would reach out to us at some point. But I would say, like if we're thinking about a true first step, like in the kind of echoing what Lydia, what you were talking about, but like giving yourself permission to actually just do some personal reflective work first. Like if you're an educator in a service, if you're a manager, if you're a leader in that space, like actually giving yourself like maybe a month to actually just document observations of what, you know, when we talk about gendered language and what stereotypes are falling into, how we're interacting, you know, be brave and ask someone to observe you in your practice, to actually see from that kind of, you know, an external eye of like, what are they noticing? What am I not picking up because I don't realize that I, you know, tell the boys how fast their shoes must be to run and how pretty the girl's dress is. Like, but, you know, in a way that is really hard for us to do ourselves. So, you know, giving that permission of actually going, where are we at? Because then it gives you a bit of that understanding of, do I need to go to, access, you know, Safe and Equal or Our Watch or these sort of resources? Do we actually need this sort of a, you know, training? Is there actually a bit of tension in the service when we do this work and we need a different thing? So actually giving yourself permission to go, actually, I need a month to really just sit and review. And that's when you can look at your policies and your procedures and your code of conducts as well, to give yourself that foundation, because you probably aren't as at, you know, like level 1 as you think. Most spaces aren't. So give that so you can really actually understand how to tailor the support your service and you need.
And I think like what we found is some of that, like there's some really great resources out there, like creating gender equity in the early years Darabin resource and the Our Watch resource. You just basically replace school with the word service. And they've got some great reflection questions that can get you started on this journey. But I think having a baseline and having some, like, documenting what's currently happening and then being able to implement something and then being able to show what the change was is really, really good fun. And writing up some of those case studies is an amazing practice, I think. And I was,
and then people might want to through when we evaluated our the pilot program of Being Equal, we did get a collection of case studies from the early learning services that participated too. So they're really worth looking at as well, because they're every of the 5 services that were in the pilot, they all sort of had a different type of focus of the areas that they chose to, concentrate on. And they're really insightful.
I'm going to pop that in the chat now. As we've been talking, I've just dropped some links into the chats if people want to have a look to all of those resources that are up shared at the moment. I wondered if there was any other questions that people had. If you want to pop them in the chat or unmute yourself, by all means. The other thing that I was going to say is that before people go, if they can please fill out the post-session survey, that would be amazing. We'll put that link in the chat. Just reading this, thank you so much for sharing your experience working in the early years space. It's been enlightening to hear about the various projects aimed at breaking down gender stereotypes and preventing violence against women and children. The more people working in this space, the greater our chances our community will live free from violence. Thank you so much. Yeah, I agree. Thank you so much, Lauren and Lydia and Sally. Really appreciate your time today. Did any of you have any last words of wisdom that you haven't yet shared with everybody? Go on, Sal.
Not that I can think of. I think the words of wisdom are that early learning educators are amazing.
Yeah. I know.
Yeah.
So I've learned so much about reflective practice from early learning services, any early childhood educators. They really do have the skills that they already need to do this work. They just need a bit more support and resourcing. Yeah. Lauren?
Oh, yeah, I would echo that, early years spaces are powerful for this work. And I 100% agree. Early years is where everything has been adopted early. It has been, really successfully done if we're talking about, any of the work around this. But I would also say, I encourage educators to to be a bit courageous with this work as well. Like there is power and but it takes courage and bravery to do this work in the community, particularly if this hasn't been done in the service before, or this kind of work hasn't. And just like, that, permission to be brave and to, make the space that is actually safe for all children.
Lydia?
I think don't underestimate tiny conversations.
Mm.
I know so many tiny moments, just one conversation, or it can spark ideas or shift perspectives. And it also, the kind of builds. So I think even if you're not sure and you just start with one tiny conversation or moment, just take the leap and go for it.
I love that. And I think that's key in, not that it can be scary taking on a new project, and it can be daunting because it seems like a controversial issue, but actually trusting the children, trusting the families, and trusting your educators to have these conversations as a community, I think it's really worth doing. And often when you feel like, with one of the centres did a survey and got some questions, but actually took it as an opportunity to have a conversation rather than feeling like it was an attack. It was absolutely perfect. And I think, brought everybody along on that journey of understanding. So yeah, no, I really appreciate all three of you coming today and sharing your wisdom with us. Thank you so much. And yeah, an ongoing community of practice, Lynn said, helps to keep momentum. I think that's 100% true. If you can set up groups of people that can support each other's practice ongoing, and learning from each other and keeping each other accountable, because you're going to meet in another 4 to 6 weeks, and you've got to have something to show for it. It is powerful. I love the 2 teams that were quite competitive, Lydia. That I think that's a great idea to inspire change. All right, well, we've actually finished early, which is phenomenal. So we gift you the gift of 5 minutes to go and get something to eat and drink. So thank you so much. Please, if you can, fill out that survey. Really appreciate you doing so, and have a lovely Monday.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Oops. Thank you. I'll just stop recording. Hang on a second.